Hey everybody, welcome to Investing in Cannabis. I'm your host, Brandon David. I see news this week. We're getting into the topics. Sam Edwards is back. We go deep into Corona and how it's affecting the cannabis industry. Hint, hint, it's been good for the cannabis industry. We also talk about how it's going to affect harvests in 2020. Talk a little bit about what Sam's been up to, doing some private consulting with some big grows up north. It's a great episode, guys. We're talking about all the topics you care about. I learned a ton. You're going to learn a ton. Tune in, listen up, get acquainted. Well, Sam, great to see you again, friend. Thanks for joining us on this remote edition of Investing in Cannabis. Welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. I'm happy to be on.
Let's just, before we got a bunch of topics, we're going to do the IC news thing here. But before we jump into it, let's just get a little update on you. I know you're working on a new project that you were talking about that's going to go through the summer. You want to talk about that, or as much as you can?
Yeah. We're just, Lake County is setting itself to be the Santa Barbara of the North. And so there's a lot of really large canopy projects up there. And so, yeah, I've got one of them.
And that's really where your background is. Today you do more like private equity type stuff, but you were always a grow consultant originally, right?
Yeah. I mean, started cultivating in my college dorm room back in 2008. Just scaled to large scale all the way up to 2017. And so I'm happy to get back into cultivation management.
So this represents an interesting skill set, right? The combination of growing and business means you have a great opinion on all of these topics. And again, one of my go-tos in the industry, and you give it real, which I think is an important part of why we started this show. We're going to start at the top. Somebody told me once upon a time not to bury the lead. So Let's talk about Corona. George of Bespoke, Bespoke, the short-term lending company.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, they sponsored some episodes. Very nice of them. We had them on the show. George, the CEO, said that Corona has been good for the cannabis industry. And so I want to start with that inflammatory point. We're going to do our best to use some data and back things up. But just overarchingly, is that true? Has it been good for the cannabis industry?
I think it depends how you want to look at it. It was good. It was good that we were deemed an essential business. It was good that there was a giant boost in sales, but those have since kind of tapered off quite a bit. And I think that regardless, if you want to look at the secondary impacts of Corona being the recession that we're in, coming up on probably about 30 million Americans in unemployment. When you look at that, it'll be kind of interesting to see what the secondary and tertiary effects of COVID are to the cannabis industry.
Well, that was a very diplomatic answer you just gave. Okay. Well, let's see if we can back it up and still see if you can maintain that straight face. I read a Cowen stat that 17% increase in March over March 2019. Now, I've heard other things that said it was much greater than that. Do you have a feeling for, at least if the whole industry hasn't been helped, what's the top line difference? What do you think?
I mean, a lot of people are buying, they have a lot more time on their hands to smoke weed, which is awesome. I think probably you and I may be finding ourselves with that much more time too.
I don't think I've increased my consumption, but I'm not a good test case.
Yeah, so there may be that uptick in demand, but it's demand for what exactly? I don't. You're seeing the edibles were kind of a huge jump in edibles, but overall, not so sure that as we go on through this year, we'll see how that demand remains. It's just if you can, a lot of people smoke weed alone, and if you drink alone, that might be a little weird, right? But smoking cannabis alone is not seen as a weird thing in the industry. And so it's obviously on a per dose basis far cheaper than alcohol. And from that standpoint, you could make a lot of inferences about demand and consumption as we go through this recession and unemployment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes I prefer to smoke alone.
Yeah.
True story. Have you seen any other competing numbers to that 17% number that are bigger or smaller, or how accurate you think that number is?
I haven't seen anything that's larger than that. I thought that I saw somewhere that we saw that roughly that same decline as the following weeks after that.
Got it. Okay. Um, Eric brought up an interesting question, producer Eric, about how much do you think has shifted to delivery versus obviously the dispensaries are open, they've been deemed essential, which is a victory alone.
Yeah.
But in addition, do you think delivery has gotten an uptake? I mean, is Flower Company seeing a big benefit here? Like, are there models that are doing better in this environment?
I don't really know. I'm sure delivery has probably, it's had to have seen an increase. I spoke to one of my friends that has pretty nice brand in the California industry, and they have a distribution license. And they when it first started, they were like, we're scrambling for delivery drivers, and that was one of their choke points. So I don't know if that's maybe they're shifting employees over into that sector, whatever, other areas of their business. I don't know.
Interesting. So despite the top headline of sales growth in this very short amount of time, the cannabis industry has been suffering for quite some time now. So much so that even Newsom, good old Newsom, he's paying attention. And he came out and said, well, you can't get an SBA loan, so we're going to try to give some tax help. And I think for some companies, it amounted to a lot of difference. How do you feel about California weighing in specifically on tax help for weed companies?
Any help is awesome. I have to say that first. I think the overarching issue, though, is a little deeper than just saying pushing back, state filings till July and things like that. I think that the core of it is, we've talked about the tax issue before I think on the last time we spoke. And if you look at what wins in recessions, meaning low priced, high dose products, I'm not talking about $65, $70 rates of premium. I'm talking about, the 7 grams for $40.
Old Pal.
THC
Pacific
product.
Stone. Yeah.
And when you look at that, if you want to look at it as for instance, like say you're a low cost producer of outdoor and lower end greenhouse product. And, the harvest tax is it has a dramatic increase on low price product because it's a straight flat fee by weight. So when you look at it from indoor versus outdoor, it dramatically impacts outdoor cultivators at a higher rate. Mm-hmm. So when you look at if those products are what we're going to see in higher velocity and taking a little bit more market share, then you can expect that you can infer that the tax rate is actually increasing, not decreasing, based on total volume of revenue sales. I think that's really unfortunate. That is, we just need to get rid of the harvest tax altogether. It's poorly implemented, and it's if you're, for instance, if you're let's say this, like if you're selling an eighth for $10, let's just hypothetically say $10, your wholesale price to the retailer is $10 as a producer, and that's packaged branded eighth. And you have your distribution costs involved, and so say you're looking at $8 back to the producer. Of that $8 for that eighth, I mean, how much is regulatory burden? Is that, and how much is the tax rate? I mean, the worst part about it, I think, is that it's over 50%, and so you're really looking at it at the end of the day when you review P&Ls and everything else with these businesses, is that out of that $8 that comes to the to the producer, I don't know, maybe 25 cents to 50 cents might be coming to the bottom line, depending on how they run their operation and what their cost of goods are.
Yeah. Which is really dramatic. It's really dramatic. I mean, I'm trying to think of other businesses that would have margins that small.
Well, it's all based on scale, and that's the way that people approached what was a 10,000 square foot license, and people looked at that as medium size, and now looking at a 1 acre operation is I have had for years thought that a 1 acre operation was minimum viable square footage. Now I'm looking at that as more like 3 acres is probably minimum viable canopy for an operation. And you really just got to cultivate a completely different way than what people have in the past. Native soils. Really not doing what we've done in the past.
So I think one of the really interesting developing stories here is sort of what's going to happen in the 2020 harvest. You have any predictions there in terms of oversupply or any thoughts on that?
What's really interesting is seeing how many people are running autoflower genetics. And just like real quick to the person that isn't real familiar with it, there's like the scientific genomes of cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and then cannabis ruderalis. Ruderalis is the autoflower, and a lot of really solid genetic cannabis breeding companies have done some crossbreeding so that you can actually get some pretty good high testing THC genetics in autoflower form. And so what autoflower allows you to do is not be subject to the photo period of light. So you can plant, do biomass crops, and usually they are done for biomass, but there's some really good quality ones coming out that you wouldn't necessarily just throw into, distillate production. They actually would be good for, high-end extracts, or also for pre-rolls. And I've actually seen some good enough that would actually make it into a glass jar. And so it's pretty interesting to see but what's interesting about it is with kind of a new era of, getting back to real agriculture, you're seeing, massive open field, multi-acre plantings, right? Row cropping of cannabis. And you're seeing a lot of people throwing out autoflowers because what it allows you to do is it reduces your pest pressures by going from autoflower seed. You can direct sow seeds into the soil. And so one of the largest choke points, not just from an investment side of capital, but also from an actual operation side, is just having enough dry space. I mean, it takes a massive amount of square footage and obviously capital to build that square footage to dry cannabis properly. So it's been interesting seeing that, how many farmers I talk to, and also the nurseries, about how many seeds they're selling of autoflowers. And there's only, there's probably about 20 autoflower genetics that I see. There's a real common, like 3 or 4 that everyone seemed to be running. And I feel like there's just going to be a massive oversupply of autoflower production and not enough drying space for it. And so,
And is that because cultivators have sort of like just done the largest scale of the first phase possible and decided, oh, well, we'll figure it out later?
Kind of. I think a lot of people are just planting, hoping that they'll get a contract with an extract company, or they'll do biomass for something. And
got it.
When you sign those contracts, you're just hoping that someone's going to come pick it up, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have the dry space to process it, what are you going to do with it?
Right.
And there's just really not enough dry space out there. So
how do you prevent them from showing up and saying the price is half now? You have so little leverage,
Yeah, it's a massive amount of leverage.
Yeah.
I mean, you just saw in the grape world last fall, a lot of people didn't even harvest their grapes because the grape price was so low. Didn't justify the cost of harvest.
Crazy.
So it's really fascinating. I don't know exactly what's going to happen this fall, but I imagine biomass prices are going to be extremely low for extracts. I think if you can grow good enough autos for pre-rolls and possible for bagged flower, I think that price will still stay pretty good. But it's really wild.
I think it's so frustrating when consumers hear that biomass, which is a fancy name for not that great weed and trim, is so cheap, and growing cannabis is so cheap, and yet when it gets to the retail, it's so fucking expensive. And I just think, like, obviously I understand how that works, but it's so frustrating and confusing for the normal guy that's like, how is my eighth $70? You know, how did we get there?
What's hard is like for a $70 eighth, I mean, that's indoor, you know, and there's a lot of costs that go into that,
Yeah.
electricity and all that. But for like outdoor, I mean, if you want to grow really good quality outdoor, you know, it's a lot of labor. Labor is one of your highest expenses. And then obviously, you know, especially with security and everything else that goes involved with that. I mean, it's to try to produce a sub $100, you know, cost of goods pound is very difficult.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And what do you think the biggest obstacle to that is? Labor?
Labor is one of them. Real estate costs is another.
Mhm.
How you're handling all of that, and then obviously, building, you know, multi-million-dollar buildings just to dry it.
Mhm. Well, hopefully two of those are short-term expenditures, right?
Yeah.
But again, I don't foresee the time where that that scale trickles down to the price of cannabis being efficiently cheaper. Do you?
I don't know. I think the supply and demand is going to drive it this fall. I think that we're just going to see who can produce it, who can produce quality, and who can't. I think that's what it's going to come down to, because quality cannabis is always going to be able to be sold before non-quality cannabis. So I think it's really going to come down to quality first, and then and obviously your price point second. I mean, if you're producing, you know, 20 to 50,000 pounds of cannabis, you know, you better have a pretty good supply chain built for that.
We talked about how the cannabis industry has been suffering. I want to get a little deeper into that specifically. There is this huge accounts receivable issue. Um, you said maybe 100 million in
I'd say,
outstanding AR in
yeah, I'd say
California.
probably between like the top 10 companies and brands in the state, there's probably about 100 to 150 million in outstanding AR.
Which is a big number for an industry in California, which is what, 5 billion?
It's massive. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's a really, when you look at the M&A side, I mean, you know, how is that being handled? A lot of people aren't buying off on the AR side.
So this one article that we both read, it was kind of funny what they wanted to do about it. It was almost like a McCarthyism, or like they want to make a list of brands that don't pay, and then create essentially what amounts to like a cannabis credit score for brands, right? Like you're not a good actor in the industry. Is this the right way to deal with this problem?
Um, I don't, I don't, I don't know. I don't necessarily. I guess the issue with what happened with AR and why it went so high last year and why it is still out there is because people were using terms as a means to gain shelf space, and we're extending terms based on the amount of capital that they had on hand to operate on, and you know, at the end of the day, it's bad business. You know, if you look at the rest of the world, you know, terms. If you were a good example is a good friend of mine that sources a lot of product from China for Amazon, right? This is just regular old business. And when there's issues, or what happened with last year with the beginning of the tariffs and the trade war, it was like, hey, I'm gonna not make such large orders. I'm gonna make smaller, more frequent orders to be more effective with my capital with an unknown volatility. And the Chinese suppliers were instantly like, we'll give you better terms. You don't need to pay 100% at time of shipping.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things like that. So the cannabis industry used those to their advantage based on how much they had in their war chest of treasury, and it's coming to bite a lot of people in the behind now.
I've asked this question on the show a number of times, maybe to you as well, but is legal cannabis working?
It's It's going to be interesting this fall. I think it's working for a certain subset of players with large canopies, with efficient operations that experience the cost of capital that was, with a weighted average cost of capital that wasn't, just all debt, that was equity and debt. If that was, sub 12%, they may be doing pretty well. But for the rest of the industry, it's a giant shakeout. I think there's kind of an unknown that's going on right now about this fall. There's a lot of people like there's a lot of when going back to low price products succeeding. I mean, how many people? I mean, and not just in California, but in other legal states as well. I mean, how many people are doing a massive, um, coronavirus garden? Everyone has all this time. It's like I was picking up strawberries and tomato starts for my own garden last week, and it's like they're picked clean. You look across the country and everyone is throwing in a massive garden in their backyard. And how many people are going to throw in a couple seeds and grow a couple plants too, and not
Right.
go to the store to buy their low price cannabis anymore?
Right. Yep. Very fair point. I still don't know how big that percentage is. I mean, you remember the wave of grow it at home devices that came out, and yeah, I don't know. It's still kind of hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I grow weed in my apartment, but I'm not a good example. Like, I think
Yeah.
most people, like, they can get a vape pen and it's good for like a month.
Yeah, I think another thing is I think you have one person on your street that throws in 6 plants and they grow
Yeah,
12, 18 pounds,
absolutely.
and all of a sudden, there's your neighborhood. But at the same time, like I think that if you're an experienced cultivator with a large canopy size, you can do really well in
You can
the
make
in the
money.
greenhouse and outdoor market.
Yeah. Um, Give an estimate. 2020 is a crazy year for a lot of people, but for cannabis in particular, and sort of like the headline of this couple month period, like, I don't think it really makes that big of a difference ultimately. And it's like it sort of, it looks like they're doing well, but everybody, like, we know they're not. So my question is, like, how many of these smaller brands are gonna die off this year? Like, at some point, it's got to catch up to them, right?
I don't know. It's all based on everyone's personal circumstances. I mean, I know some smaller brands that they own their real estate. They're not paying high lease rates. They're not.
Mm-hmm.
They keep a really tight ship, and they're probably going to be fine. But they don't outsource any of their. They do all their own compliance. They don't. They operate a very efficient business, and they're in survival mode. And I fully believe that they will survive. But I think it's the medium tier people that have kind of maybe swung a little too far for what their capital on hand was. I think it's no surprise to anybody that the cost of capital this year, if you can even get it, is going to be insane. I mean, there's so much opportunity for investment outside of cannabis right now,
Yep.
that unless the investment is very enticing, it's
I
not
mean,
going to
yeah. How do you compete with the S&P 500 is down, 30%? How can you compete with that? Like, on a risk reward ratio, it's so hard. Yeah. Um,
and the real and like no one knows what's going on with real estate prices right now.
yep.
So it's kind of the lease buyback to free up capital for operations is kind of tricky because no one's really figured out how far real estate prices are going to fall as well.
Yep. Well, one of the continued uncertainties is political. And given that we're in an election year, let's talk a little bit about best outcomes for cannabis. Um, First of all, I think in years past, you would have always said, well, it's better if the Democrat gets elected for cannabis. But I'm not so sure at this point, because Trumpito is not really a Republican. He's a Trumper. So, and isn't it? I think it's possible that he uses it some way towards the end to try to pull some liberal votes.
Yeah, it's really unknown. I think a greater, how many of these stimulus packages are going to have to get signed by Congress? I don't know. It could be probably at least 2 more. And if we can get something out of any of those packages, that would be awesome. I don't know what the presidential election is going to hold. I will just say that we need federal legalization as an industry. We've always, sometimes we've kind of been like, let's push it off a little bit because it allows people to, smaller businesses to succeed in markets. And
I've never felt that way, but yeah, I
yeah,
know
people
that
have said
narrative.
it. People have been like, oh, it's better that we wait a little bit while our business gets bigger and stuff. And we need it so bad. I mean, we need it. We need it this fall, but we need it next year too.
Yeah, when we were doing Prop 64 episodes, people would hate on us. How can you support that? And all this shit. Anyway, look, it's not perfect, but legal is better than illegal. I believe.
Yeah, and it's been really hard for a lot of folks, but we have something, and hopefully we can try to change it. Versus having nothing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, I really can't envision it being part of the current stimulus packages. That'd be great, but I don't see that.
Well, I mean, if we just had banking, or if we had some sort of relief, or any movement forward would be, this.
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks about the Safe Banking Act. How beneficial would that actually be? I mean, is that enough for a period of time?
It'd be nice not to have to pay the insane fees to properly bank.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not enough for for the amount of supply that's coming down in all the legal states this fall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. Let's shift gears. Talk about you, man. How are you doing in this time of Corona? Has your cannabis consumption gone up? I know you still have a job, so that's good.
Yeah, it's gone up. Just mostly just because in the evenings, I don't have like a commute, or I'm not working to finish something at 7 p.m. Or
right.
Something I can get off work at 5:30 and smoke a little more than I usually would before trying to go to bed early.
Got it. So what are you doing with yourself other than increasing your cannabis consumption? Are you reading more? Are you learning more? Have you picked up any new hobbies?
I've got an awesome vegetable garden. I've just been doing work around my property. Really, yeah, that's kind of what's interesting about Corona in a macro business sense, is that it's allowing a lot of people to reprioritize their whole life.
Uh-huh.
I think I was reading something on LinkedIn about it. We were talking about it in my MBA program the other day, about how people are reprioritizing themselves, and then also people that were laid off, and then also when they do come back to work, are not going to have the same loyalties to their company as that they did before. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think what a lot of managers are saying and worried about is, if we have a decrease in productivity of our existing workforce that comes back because they want more work-life balance, they're not willing to just do the 60 hours on salary like they were. And so then you're paying the same amount, but you're getting less productivity. And so then that again hurts your bottom line, and you're already on the ropes.
I think what it does is it forces people to hire better. And so I think in a good economy, that's about trying harder, right? In a bad economy, I think it's harder. But like, I just remember when I've been hired in different jobs, they thought ahead of, okay, well, there's some amount of remote in this tech company, whatever startup. And so like, they kind of interviewed me with the idea of like, okay, we're not going to manage him every day. And I think that changes when you allow people to go more remote, is you have to essentially have to trust them more. You don't see them all day. You can't yell at them. You don't know if they're wearing pants,
Well, and from the employee side, they actually have to produce real valuable results, because they can't just be like, well, it took an extra week and I was there all the time, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
but I think it depends on the company culture. Yes, you're speaking from companies that I've been a part of too, which results are what matters. But at the same time, like some of these companies are going to find just new ways to punch the clock. You know,
yeah,
like
yeah,
I used to have a boss that he was like, if you're not on Slack, you're not working. And so everybody would just be on Slack, but like that didn't mean you were working. Like
yeah.
yeah.
I hope that a lot of time is wasted in meetings. I mean, there's the meme. If this meeting could have been an email, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I think that there's probably a lot less meetings taking place.
Yep. Because they're
Um,
not fun.
yeah, or I mean, it's just travel and everything else. It's like, it's kind of forcing a level of efficiency that is going to be required to stay in business.
Well, I think efficiency is one way to put it. I also think that there's just been a lot lost here, though.
Yeah,
Like I've had several projects kind of fall apart during this time because, and maybe this is just me, one of my skills is sitting in front of people and convincing them of things. And the phone just isn't the same, it's just not the same as going to lunch and having someone in front of you. And,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing is it's like earlier this week I had my first kind of in-person meetings and stuff, and it was like, we've been working, we hadn't seen each other in 2 months, and it was just kind of like, okay, this is like productive, feels good, we're all on the same page, we're not like, so there's a certain amount of in-person stuff that you can't get on the phone.
Yeah, unfortunately. But somehow we've managed to have a good conversation here, friend. And
Yeah,
I enjoyed it. Good to see your beautiful face. Thanks for weighing in on the topics. We'll have to do it again soon.
yeah, sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Stay safe, stay sane, healthy, all the things. Did you get a cool mask?
I just got one. Yeah.
Got
I had other masks, but I just got a cool one.
Ooh, quarantine, but make it fashion. Yeah. All right, man. See you soon.